If you've ever tried to run your own desert setting in D&D 5e, you've run into a problem. There simply aren't enough monsters to make it feel fantastical. There's only so many times a caravan of camels can crest over a desert dune before you start getting that sinking feeling that this is all just getting a bit Arabian Nights. So, when faced with a problem, what do the best GMs do? Steal inspiration from somewhere else. Today, I'm going to take you through the world of Athos, the setting of the wonderful Dark Sun resources, from a time long before 5th edition. A world of deserts, danger, death, and damn cool monsters. These beasties are all you're going to need to turn your run-of-the-mill desert campaign setting into something far, far more. The Mckillot. I'm starting off big here. Literally. Mckillot are gargantuan, armoured lizards, which are fiercely territorial and independent, but can in theory be subjugated and used to carry great loads across desert wasteland. In Dark Sun, Mckillots are used by the wealthy as argosies, or moving fortresses, carrying around either wheeled fortifications or fortifications built on the very back of the creature itself. Part toad, part ankylosaurus, these beasties are known for their prehensile tongues, their nigh impenetrable armour, and their habit of doing whatever the hell they want. While they are big behemoths, probably around CR7, CR8 in 5th edition, you shouldn't be afraid of letting your players interact with them. Your players could perhaps purchase passage on a Mckillot's back, or perhaps purchase one for themselves if they have the funds. Of course, this will come with expert trainers and handlers to make sure that the thing doesn't go too far out of control, but there's always that risk there. In Dark Sun, where psionics are more prevalent, psionic powers are used to control these beasts to a certain extent. But the wonderful thing about the Mckillot is that whatever you do, eventually it will do what it wants. Whether that be snapping up one of its handlers with its long prehensile tongue, swallowing them whole, or wandering off into an inhospitable reach of the desert that you definitely don't want to visit. Mckillots will just do things because they are strong-willed, and that will is not ever wholly broken. Interesting Mckillot encounters could include a rampage at a beast market where they're being sold, as one normally docile Mckillot just snaps one day and turns into a gargantuan tank creature stomping through market stalls. You could even find a Mckillot wandering alone in the desert, with a fortification built on its back, but nobody left, leaving you to wonder where this thing has been, and where the passengers on its back have disappeared to. The Sandbride is the perfect, ready-made desert encounter. It ticks all of the boxes. Roleplay, combat, and it even highlights an interesting feature of desert environments. A Sandbride is an undead from the negative plane, which feeds on the hope and the life force of weary travellers. It has the ability to create hallucinatory terrain around itself, which it usually shapes into a desert oasis. And as a little added incentive, the Sandbride likes to transform into a form that certain members of your party might find attractive, bathing in the very centre of this oasis. A double honey trap, if you will. In reality, they are a fairly nasty, low to medium CR undead, made almost entirely of sand and spite, seeking to suck the life out of weary travellers who are really hoping for something, finally, to go their way. Fascinatingly, the Sandbride has just enough intelligence to hold some semblance of conversation, although it will be stilted, unconvincing, and maybe a little off. The creature parrots information it heard many moons ago. Being an undead, it doesn't see that many people and doesn't talk to very many either. It hopes to do just well enough to convince the characters to take a sip of the illusory oasis. And at the exact moment that your characters are bent over, filling their mouths with sand, it attacks. Crucially though, the Sandbride offers an opportunity for your players to feel clever. For figuring out that maybe there is such a thing as too good to be true, while also offering a really interesting encounter with an undead that's differently flavoured to the rest. It sells the threat of your desert excellently, and it is literally the perfect counter to this thirsty, horny bard that may be travelling with your group. There's a very good reason why large settlements don't tend to spring up in the very middle of deserts in our human history. Large populations require large-scale agriculture, or at the very least, some ability to farm food. Thankfully, this is fantasy, so we have large beasties to help us solve this little problem. The Kank is an 8-foot-long, 4-foot-high beetle with a gigantic exoskeleton, and forget camels. These things are what you want to be travelling with in the desert. They're strong and sturdy mounts, excellent pack animals, and their chitinous hide keeps them safe from most threats. And if one dies, said chitinous hide could form the basis of a very interesting piece of armour. These beasts really do seem to have it all. And that's without me even mentioning the fact that they produce honey. Think of Kanks as cow-sized ant bees, organising in hives around brood mothers. In Dark Sun, they are shepherded around to gain access to their incredibly nutritious honey. But beware, they taste awful, excreting horrible chemicals, pungent aromas, which put off anyone trying to eat their flesh when they die. This actually makes them even better pack animals, surprisingly, as they're nowhere near the top of the list for any predator out there. A Kank encounter can be peaceful. Perhaps you spot a herder with hundreds of these creatures travelling across a dune, a big black swarm of shining chitinous armour. Perhaps some bandits have made off with part of the herd and are using them as armoured mounts to commit villainy all around the desert. Or perhaps a nomadic tribe who herds Kank has the broodmother sick, and their Kanks are abandoning ship left, right and centre, traversing across the desert trying to find a new hive, sensing the impending end of their queen. These are a very low CR monster, but they are a tough old bug, which can have some really interesting world building implications for your desert setting. Replacing your camel trains with these guys is gonna immediately inject some mythic fantasy into your world, and has the added benefit of taking you away from any Aladdin comparisons. The Cloud Ray. Our final beast today is one for your high-level players, or some low-level players that you really want to scare. Those eagle-eyed among you may recognise this beastie from the Spelljammer setting. Those less eagle-eyed among you will see a gigantic manta ray. And those of you who aren't even looking at the screen will be wondering why I'm recommending a manta ray in a desert setting. This, on Athos, is a Cloud Ray, a gigantic manta-like beast which uses the air currents generated by the hot desert air and the sand dunes to loft itself across the duney wastes. They have wicked tails called a zip, which they use to scythe through individuals or even structures that get in their way. and they spend much of their time drifting on the winds in a deep, semi-dreamlike state, making them strangely sedate when they're not interested in hunting you. With a mouth about 20 feet across and the advantage of an entirely monochromatic hunting ground, and some latent psionic power to help pick out thoughts down there on the ground, these things are never short of a meal. Perhaps your players see the great shadow blotting out the sun and have mere moments to hide. Perhaps there is a known nesting ground of cloud rays up in the nearby mountains that they hunt and own the entire desert area. Or perhaps that strange, smooth outcrop of warm stone that they're currently standing on begins to shift, and they have to grab on for dear life as the cloud ray takes off with them on its very back. Battling a beast while holding onto its back flying through the air makes for an excellent combat encounter, especially with the stakes so high of falling off, and especially with the saw-like tail that this thing can whip around to dislodge and cut anyone on its back. The Cloud Ray is the sort of beastie that rivals some dragons, if it's in a world that isn't Athos, as natural dragons actually don't exist in Dark Sun. It makes a refreshing change from that classic blue dragon encounter that everyone puts in at the end of their desert campaign because blue dragons live in the desert. And with the half-conscious hovering, the perpetually dreaming, drifting form of the Cloud Ray can provide some sort of a longer term threat. It exists in the world and it is visible in the world, unlike the slightly more intelligent dragons which keep to themselves until time to strike. Floating high in the stratosphere, it can be a much more present threat than the dragon lurking under the sand. And its dreamlike half-sleep has this added benefit of allowing it to be present without being a threat. A Cloud Ray then functions as something of a sword of Damocles in a desert setting. The sort of ever-present force of nature, a creeping doom that eventually must be confronted, but not yet. Let's just hope not yet. This really helps build up and foreshadow the fight and get your players invested before this climactic fight is going to take place. And with how cool this creature is, how could it disappoint? These beasts are all from older editions of D&D, but thankfully some of the brilliant folks over at the Dark Sun subreddit have been working tirelessly to convert a bunch of this content into 5th edition. So I'm here to tell you that not only have these cool ideas just been presented with you, you also now are able to run them, and a whole bunch more. I will link to the bestiary in the description, and make sure to check out the brilliant work that the folks over there are doing, as well as checking out athos.org, which is a free repository of almost everything conceivably Dark Sun. I mean, if we're talking open gaming licenses, this is a gold mine. In the meantime, spice up your desert with these bizarre, magical, strange and psionic monsters that are going to have your players hooked. Because trust me, nothing is better than your DM showing you a picture and describing a beast that you've never, ever seen before. Thank you for watching. I have so much more to say about Dark Sun. It's pretty much my favourite campaign setting ever. So if you'd like more videos going in depth on any aspect of Dark Sun's or Athasian lore, I'm more than happy to make it. I've used a bunch of these monsters in my games already, and they really give this fascinating, interesting vibe that you're not necessarily gonna get from your typical Arabian Nights style desert fantasy, or even your classic Egyptian style fantasy desert. Check out the links in the description. Thank you for watching. Make sure you subscribe and share this with a friend. And I'll see you in the next one.